What's going on, guys? It's time for another Sysadmin Time Wasters episode. I'm in career research. First, I want to give a big shout out to Ansible. I've been using Ansible for a large project that I'm working on, and it is just a freaking dream. I started off kind of reticent to get completely into it because I used and liked Puppet. But after a couple months of heavily using Ansible, there's just no way I'm going to use anything else, at least that I've seen right now, including things like SaltStack. Um, Ansible's amazing for things like configuration management, for deployment, and for just general management of systems. So it fits in really neatly if you're interested in DevOps, and I think it's going to be a very useful skill set to have. This is their paid product, and I'm so happy with it that I'm considering using this or recommending it for the project I'm working on. It's open source, it's Python, it's fantastic. Okay, Ansible.com. Usenix. If you're a Linux or Unix sysadmin, this is the conference, the community. They've been around for a long time. They have just unbelievably good resources, and there's a conference, it looks like. Oh yeah, Oakland, California. I have a bunch of family in Oakland. Man, I wish I could go. If you can make it to a Usenix conference, you probably should try to do that. This is a career that you're in. They've also got really useful resources. If you have the dough, subscribe to Login Magazine. It's sort of a really, really, really high quality sysadmin magazine. You can buy it in an e-format or get a printed version. They also have these really sort of short books. They're sort of, I guess, long tutorials. You can see there's some that are really interesting. I mean, this is for people with limited time. You just need to know one topic, sort of the basics, a tiny little bit of context and information. This series of, I guess you could call them books, I don't know, short topics, essays, tutorials, probably something worth looking at. Third, if you don't know regular expressions, it's a core building block of dealing with Linux and Unix. Most applications, or most of the applications you're going to use every day to filter, sort, and interpret complex data are going to have some way of using regular expressions to figure out what data you want to target. So I've just written a really, really ghetto very simple regular expression here just to play around and have something to show. regex101.com. There's a bunch of other things like this, but basically it's a tough topic to learn if you can't be experimenting. So like just reading about regular expressions is almost useless unless you have some kind of photographic memory, which I don't. So playing around is the only way. So just to demonstrate, we've got a string here, and we're looking for things that look like phone numbers. And I'm just using very, very basic regex building blocks here. So we're saying we'd like to see 0 or more left parens, followed by 3 digits, followed by 0 or more right parens. You can see 0 or more because this matches as well. Then 0 or more spaces, 3 digits, 0 or more hyphens. That's what this little star means. 0 or more of the preceding token, and 4 more digits, DDDD. As you can see, this highlights, it doesn't highlight things like this because there's no space in between. This should match. Yeah, so if you add the space, I mean, that's really the only thing this is looking for, so it's not at all a reliable regex for actually finding phone numbers, but, it lets you play around and experiment, which I think is the fastest way of learning regexes. It also has these really nice descriptions and explanations on the right. It's got a little quick reference card, and I think you can even have, there's a bunch of community stuff, so you can sort of pick something you know about. Like, I know basically what an RFC 822, or is it 822? Well, whatever the RFC for email address format is. And I want to see what the regex for that looks like. Really? RFC 5322? I thought it was something older. Maybe it's a newer RFC. I'm going to look this up right now. I was convinced that it was 822. Huh. That's so strange. No, I guess what the real question is, what is RFC 822? Huh. So obviously faqs.org/RFCs is where to get the documents that basically define how the internet works and how everything that interoperates on the internet works. Well, it's the RFCs, request for comments. It's the design documents by the IETF. Okay, well there it is. ARPA Internet Text Messages. Huh. Well, it had me. 822. Well, now I know. Anyway, sorry for that distraction. Now you know how to look up how the internet is made. World building, Stack Exchange, world building. It's hilarious. If you must be familiar with Stack Exchange. It's a series of question and answer sites where the highest voted questions and answers are voted to the top. It's a source of tremendously good content. So the ones, I think I've mentioned these in other videos, you'll want the super user Stack Exchange, and they obviously also have Unix and Linux ones, I think. This is world building. For writers and artists using science, or this is sort of where they go to get plausible scientific explanations for things they want to try, but with the sole purpose of explaining, constructing logically imaginary worlds and settings. It's hilarious and amazing. I mean, some of the things you see here, they're just out of this world. Just to show you a couple funny ones I was looking for. How can I imprison a wizard who can walk through walls? Lengthy explanation of the sort of boundary conditions. And then some really amazing answers, including like things like charts of the type of prison he should be in, and on and on. There's a couple other funny ones that I have here. If you teleported a modern human to medieval times, what would they be able to achieve, and what would be the likely outcome if, worst case and best case? Again, very interesting answers. A lot of discussion. It's hilarious. I mean, it's like, yeah. If you need to just relax and get creative again, this is probably a good place to go. And, of course, my favorite so far, what's the most entertaining way to prove to someone that they aren't real? So you're in the Matrix, and your job is to convince someone to wake up and say, and sort of prove to them that they're in a simulation. There's an amazing, amazing answer using input and output buffers. So basically like shell redirection, essentially. If you're familiar with that for Linux or Unix, where you take a shell command and you redirect its input or output to or from a file, doing that with people's input and output buffers, so their sensory input from it. Okay, this sounds super geeky. I'm like listening to myself saying this and it's ridiculous, but I'm telling you, read through this. It's hilarious, and it will just kind of spark that little bit of creative recharge should you need it after, staring at a wall of configuration code or something. This is funny if you're interested in software development. This bot will accept anything. You can simply contribute things, and as long as they work, well, there you go. It will automatically merge pull requests, so there's no human looking it over. So anything that gets upvoted by the community will get incorporated into the code. This is sort of a Frankenstein's community monster where everyone is building, and you can get a feel for what kind of stuff is going on here. It's constantly changing. Pretty hilarious stuff. So I recommend just cloning this and playing with it. And if you have any ideas, write some code and submit a pull request. This is probably the easiest open source project to get started with that I can imagine, because if it's funny, it will get accepted. How simple is that? Okay. I think this is older. Oh yeah, 06. A friend sent me this just as a cool, look what I found thing. This is how to write a web server. You might be used to things like Apache or Cherokee or Zeus if you're using an outdated web server. I actually saw that in production a couple days ago. It's terrifying. Or Nginx, obviously, if you are a young, cool kid. But it's these tools that we use for serving websites, especially dynamic websites, are so complicated that they often obscure the essentially simple thing that they're actually doing at the very core. To compare this with Nginx is that you're almost not talking about the same thing anymore. But it's amazing to see how small a request that simply takes uh, an HTTP request in and returns a response, a valid response. How simple that code actually is and what it actually does, and seeing the mechanism kind of just in Bash right in front of you, in 15 lines or whatever it is, it explains how HTTP works, at least at this level, and the core of what it is that one of these web servers does. So I really recommend, if you're not familiar with any of this stuff, if this sounds like pretty exotic and strange to you, just look at this. It's almost no code at all. It's just a Bash script. Look through it. Look up things that you don't understand, where you don't understand how they work, and you'll know more than you did before. But you'll understand it, I think, on a level that just reading a definition of how a web server works or of how client and server interact with HTTP, it's just better. It's practical. Okay. This is, again, recommended reading for developers from one of my favorite programming sort of meta programming sites, Coding Horror. It's by the guy who created the Stack Exchange things and Discourse as well. He's been writing about coding for a long, long time, and I think he's a Windows guy, actually. But what he writes about, I mean, he owns a large software company now, or I guess I don't know if it's large, but successful software company now, and writes more about the non-algorithm specific things about coding. So this is definitely useful for sysadmins as well. I know that I've been talking a lot about code. I've even done a Ruby tutorial, but I think this industry that we're in as sysadmins is that, you're going to hear the word software defined more and more and more. And if you can't write some code, if you're not comfortable with that stuff, I think you're going to be at a real disadvantage, because things are moving towards everything being done in software. The reasoning is our whole stack is basically running in software. So from the cloud where we store things, we're not even running our own storage arrays anymore. We're just using object storage with Google or Amazon. And all this stuff is abstracted into software and APIs that simply talk to each other. And the need for sysadmins that just, troubleshoot, look into the logs, and swap out hard drives, you absolutely need to know how to do that stuff. But I think in the future, sysadmins are going to spend a lot less time racking servers and a lot more time writing repeatable automation and configuration scripts. So I really highly recommend that you just start programming just for fun. Don't, it's not something huge to learn. You can start programming pretty quickly, and I'm actually going to, I think, make a little series on less the theory of programming and more just, how to pick a cool project and get programming skills quickly, because I think a project-based approach is just about the only way to quickly and effectively learn some of these skills, because they're so abstract that even if you memorize all the facts, it doesn't give you any practical skills unless you are learning those theoretical things as you need them for a practical project. Okay, sorry, small pedagogical rant. But so recommended reading for developers. I couldn't agree more with things like Code Complete. I think I even heard about it here. These aren't things that are these aren't programming books. These aren't learn this language in 24 hours books. They are books about how the software creation and maintenance and growing process works and is managed. So they are this is a classic, of course, the Mythical Man Month, how, throwing more people at a project doesn't actually make it go faster. It actually makes it go slower because you have all this training overhead. A lot of this stuff applies to, I think, operations, what we do. These aren't difficult books. They're not technical books. They're simply books that have ideas in them that will help you. There's also some, I think the usability stuff is maybe less important for a sysadmin, but you have to learn about how software development works, because the problem with sysadmins, or for sysadmins, is that to management, you are always a cost center, and the programmer sitting one office away from you is an investment. It's someone who builds value, and you are simply a cost, and costs need to be reduced, right? Because you're simply the operational cost for something. Now, again, I think software development and system administration will kind of merge a little bit more, and you're already seeing this with things like the DevOps movement, etc. But you need to understand how the software side of the house works, because you need to be able to talk that language, and you need to be able to talk to your boss and management and make business cases for things. You need to understand where they're coming from too, and this is where they're coming from. Okay, something a little bit lighter, The Straight Dope. If you've never read The Straight Dope, it's hilarious. It's sort of deeply researched, silly topics. This is a silly one, but it's a good place to start. Does anybody actually like circus peanuts? So someone writes in, and Cecil does some research and replies. The answers are always very interesting, almost always, no matter how silly the topic seems. And you can see some funny... Oh, I guess these are staff reports. You're going to want Cecil Adams columns. Yeah, this is like the original... I don't know if you ever... Okay, you know how XKCD does the what if thing, and he actually just wrote the book as well? This is like the original version of that. From, I think my dad was reading this on our Mac, probably 1996 or something. So it's been around for a long, long time. At some point, someone will not know what XKCD is. So actually, let's just see what my favorite ones are. Python. Yeah, that's good. That's a good one. But let's see, XKCD sysadmin. There it is. Devotion to duty. I think this was, at my first sysadmin gig, I printed this out, cut it out, and taped it above my desk. As far as I know, it made a good impression on people, but I don't think they would have told me if it didn't. So, paste this above your cubicle at your own risk. Good stuff, though. uBlock, a new blocker I've been using. It's very interesting. It approaches blocking from this isn't to preserve your privacy and stuff, although that is a welcome side effect. It's more about reducing the amount of bullshit third-party scripts and resources that you load, thereby making your browsing faster. The recent John Oliver, dick pics thing with privacy and the Snowden thing and all that, like, people just don't care about any of the technical things that you and I might understand. And this stuff is not interesting to normal people, but that the NSA can save your dick pics is interesting to people and gets them pissed off. If you haven't seen that John Oliver bit, I just recommend searching for it on YouTube. But the point is, it's hard to talk about even very important technical things with people, like your family, the people that you have a power to affect for the greater good. So this is a nice way of saying, oh, this is not a plugin that will protect you from the NSA and from third-party tracking and from advertisers who are cataloging your every move and want and feeling. Instead, you can say, this is it's something that'll basically make your browser load less of that annoying crap and just make things load faster and work better. It's lovely, right? Nice and simple. If you're on Chrome, this is in the add-ons section. As far as I know, so this is what it looks like when it's blocking things. This little pop-up you get. And I wanted to just install it quickly to show you. Installation, Firefox. You'll just download the XPI from right here. You can literally just... Oops. There it is. uBlock Firefox XPI. Allow. And this will download and install the plugin. Hit install now. And you'll have to restart, but you can give it a try. I've been using it for about a week. A couple friends recommended this to me, and it really does seem very cool. Something you could probably use as a replacement for things like AdBlock Plus, which now takes money from advertisers to whitelist their ads, or Ghostery, which is sponsored by the ad industry. Again, this is like nice, open source, cleverly done, and something that's very easy to justify installing on, your mom's, your girlfriend's, your boyfriend's, your grandmother's machine. Okay, so that's uBlock. That's github.com/gorehill/uBlock. I've been in love with ZFS. I'm working on a project that uses a lot of the super amazing, cool ZFS features right now. And this is the 2012 presentation in 2 parts on ZFS. The screen's a little bit hard to see. It's just done in a very low resolution, but the presentation is fantastic, and it gives you a huge, fairly in-depth view of ZFS. I should probably explain what ZFS is, huh? So if you don't know, it's the zettabyte file system. It is a next-generation file system. It's copy on write, which means instead of overwriting blocks, it writes new blocks and then changes the reference up the tree. Okay, hang on. Let's do this another way. ZFS, it's basically the Ferrari of file systems. It is incredibly safe, meaning if data gets corrupted, like on your file system right now, like if it's NTFS on Windows or if it's X3 or 4 on Linux, if some data gets corrupted, you're basically screwed. There's no way to know whether something has been corrupted because it's just data. So when the operating system retrieves, say, a block, and that block has data whatever in it, there's no way to know. Is that the real data? Has it been flipped by a cosmic ray? Does it have multiple bits of errors? We don't know. ZFS, and on Linux, this is sort of comes from Solaris, and you can find it natively in FreeBSD. It's been done through Fuse in Linux as well. I think there's a non-Fuse version as well. Comparable in Linux would be like ButterFS, even though it's much less mature than this. Even if you don't have redundancy, it has a checksum for each block, so you can figure out if the block you're reading has been damaged somehow because you've basically hashed it, if that makes sense. So this is a way of detecting errors and fixing them if you've got any kind of redundancy built in. It's got unbelievable I'm not doing this thing justice. I'm sorry. I just wanted to recommend the video. This video will explain why ZFS is so freaking cool, and it will give you a really good overview of how to use it, how to think about using it, what to use it for, where maybe not to use it yet. Yeah, I mean, that's really just VMs, I guess. I mean, it's fine even for databases when you use zvols, so it doesn't matter. You should look into ZFS. This is sort of like, for a lot of companies, the secret sauce. It's not new or shiny, but it's just so much unbelievably freaking much better than just about any other, certainly any other consumer accessible storage technology, and even some enterprisey stuff. This was built by really smart people thinking about the future from the ground up, and it's battle tested. I highly recommend looking at this video, and I highly recommend checking out ZFS. It's freaking amazing. One thing well. Okay, Unix, Linux, the Unix philosophy, do one thing well. Unix is sort of a conglomeration of at least what in Linux would be the distribution. In Unix, it's just part of the operating system. But the tools in Unix, the command line tools, are designed to do one thing well. That's true for most of them. And that's the underlying philosophy. You do one thing well, and you communicate through the universal interface. It actually says it right here, which is text, plain text. Just a rundown or link to tools that do one thing very well. And that might be interesting to look at. Okay, Vim or VI. I will try really getting into Vim and not just knowing the basics of editing with it. I will actually try writing code with it and really getting into it as my main editor, but I haven't done it yet. Some of my very good friends and coworkers use it and love it and swear by it. This would be the opposite side to the Emacs editor in the holy war of editors. It's been raging for 20 years. It's another classic editor that's just become incredibly optimized for dealing with text, which is what we do in Unix and Linux. I thought this was a really good article because it sort of goes into the philosophy of using V and how it's different from the text editors that we're used to, that we grow up with, like, starting with Word and then maybe trying something like TextMate or another editor where the concept of modes doesn't really exist. It just clears up some of those misconceptions and makes a pretty interesting case for some of the features that the Vim folk swear by. I should make one of these for Emacs one day because I really love Emacs, but it's also nice because so many places already have V. Well, everything has V installed, or VI, I don't know how to pronounce it. But you can find Vim everywhere, so it's useful at least to learn the basics of these editors. And this might be an interesting place to sort of give you a heads up for what to expect. This has become a tremendously long video, so I'm going to cut it short there. I hope you enjoyed. In summation, use ZFS. At least play with ZFS. It's just so freaking cool. I'll see you in the next one. Later.